Welcome to 5 Good Questions. I'm your host, Jake Taylor. Our guest today is Mark Moffett. Mark is a tropical biologist and explorer known for finding rare species and behavior in remote places. His research has extended from the architecture of rainforest canopies to the behavior of army ants. For the last 6 years, he's been merging psychology and anthropology to investigate the role of social identity in holding societies together across species and in humans up to the present day. Today we're going to be discussing his book, The Human Swarm: How Our Societies Arise, Thrive, and Fall. Let's ask Mark 5 good questions. But first, I'm happy to announce my literary debut, The Rebel Allocator, is now available on Amazon in both print and digital formats. You could say it's about time. I've been pouring my heart into this book for more than 3 years. A well-known SoCal billionaire received an early copy of the book and actually called me to say he enjoyed the story and was adamant that I get it made into a movie. Talk about a surreal experience getting 20 minutes on the phone with one of my heroes. My friend Tobias Carlyle had this to say: Jacob Taylor has written a modern-day investment classic. The Rebel Allocator is reminiscences of a stock operator for value investors. It's a fictionalized retelling of the lessons in The Intelligent Investor in an accessible page-turner. If you want to learn how to invest like Warren Buffett by sitting at his knee, this is the book for you. Wow, how flattering is that? I was blown away when he sent me that. I've created dozens of ad-free author interviews over the last 5 years and never asked for anything in return. If you've gotten any value out of these efforts, please do me a personal favor and pick up a copy of The Rebel Allocator. I promise you won't regret it. And now, on with the show. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. My guest today is Mark Moffett, and he's the author of The Human Swarm. And Mark, thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
A pleasure, Jake.
So, one of the things that I really liked about your book was just learning so much about different animals and how they sort of structure their societies, really. And that, to me, like the breadth of different animal things that I learned just tickled me.
No, that was part of the fun. Basically, I had to even figure out who had societies across the animal kingdom to do this book. And so I spent months just going through all kinds of creatures and seeing how they lived and worked and functioned together.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You really pulled together a crazy amount of research, really, I think.
Thanks. Well, hopefully it's crazy enough to be fun to read.
Yeah, no, it was. I feel like I could pull out a thousand things at cocktail parties now. Did you know XYZ?
I'm going to a cocktail party tomorrow. Maybe I can take advantage. We'll find out. I'll let you know.
Okay. So question number one, what is so remarkable about being able to walk into a modern day coffee shop, let's say in New York?
Yeah, well, we don't appreciate it, but this is one thing I began to realize when I looked across the animal kingdom and to humans that's really fundamental, and it's been missed. That is that coffee shops are awesome. You can walk into a coffee shop and not want to kill everyone or run away in terror, or at least walk up to everybody in the coffee shop and figure out who they are. And a chimpanzee could not do that. Most other vertebrate animals could not do that, for the simple fact that most species have to know everybody in their society as an individual. There's no allowance for strangers in most creatures. And the fact that humans can come across and meet or just pass by hundreds, and in New York, tens of thousands potentially of strangers every day, and nothing bad happens. And that capacity seems like a little thing, and in a way it is, but it was the possibility that led to us having huge societies. Not huge brains, but just the possibility of being around strangers and being comfortable with strangers.
How many do you think that took like a really long time evolutionarily for us to sort of like deaden that fight or flight response to strangers?
Well, we can have a fight and flight response to individuals we know well. What happens with humans and strangers is that we're able to look at others in a different way. And the remarkable thing is that this is most parallel to some of the social insects like ants. Ants don't have to know everyone. Chimpanzees do. Ants don't have to know everyone because they use what's equivalent to the national flag, a scent in their case, an odor in their body surface. If you have it, you're golden. And we have all kinds of flags. We have many more kinds of flags than, of course, ants do, and many more complicated types of flags. But the neat thing is that those flags don't have to be expensive for us to put on and use. We're signaling to each other all the time in a very automatic, rapid way, faster than the blink of an eye. We are passing people and taking them in and feeling comfortable with them if we have a sense of them belonging there.
So that's a perfect segue to question number 2, which is what can ants they only have 250,000 neurons in their brains roughly compared to, billions for us. But what can they teach us about human societies?
I don't think more than 250,000 of mine are working at any one time. So, just in fairness to ants, what's really, even Darwin said there's nothing more marvelous on Earth than the brain of an ant. And what you can do with a small brain is really incredible. In fact, we're finding out that many things can be programmed, many kinds of social behaviors can be programmed very easily without requiring a large brain. And the thing is about ants that people find turns them off is this idea that they're so alien. But in fact, parallels don't mean anything between things that are identical. That's really boring. For similarities to have some excitement for us, they have to be between things that are ordinarily seems different. And what ants and humans do is very much alike in many cases. We are much more like certain ants than we are like chimpanzees. No chimpanzee worries about traffic rules and highways and infrastructure and public health and division of labor and assembly lines and complicated teamwork and warfare and all these kinds of things that ants do. And that's for a simple reason, is because both ants and humans have huge societies. And once you have tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of individuals, you have to have a way of moving the troops around, getting the resources to the right places. It may have nothing to do with intelligence in the case of ants, but without those capacities, ants would fall apart. And so they end up having lots of things in common with us.
I'm in California, so part of the book talks about these basically 4 different sort of super societies of ants that are all battling at basically like in a trench warfare, like World War I style, where they're butting up against each other. Can you maybe tell a little bit more about what's happening there?
Well, these are the Argentine ants, which is an invasive species, and it was looking at them that led me to realize that there was something missing in our discussions of societies and what societies are and how these parallels might work in different kinds of animals, because the Argentine ants have societies that can go into the trillions of individuals, going under over hundreds of square miles. So you can live in San Francisco, where I was at Berkeley for a while, and in the kitchens there you will find these Argentine ants because there are millions of them in the average backyard throughout Southern California. So you could take one of those and drive it 500 miles down to the Mexican border and drop it off, and it'll be just fine. It's as if it's still home, because the ants there have this same national flag than it does, the same scent, and it just goes on working with the individuals there as if it had been up in San Francisco. But if you carried it across a borderline that you can't see, but the ants judge with their lives, it's outside of San Diego, that ant will be dead within minutes, because it's there that the 2 of these super colonies collide. There are actually 4 of them, as you say, in the whole state. And the fact that they can retain this identity and common belonging across so many individuals is a remarkable thing. We don't even do it that effectively, of course, because we get differences in our culture from place to place. But the ants do it, and they do it to a T across a virtual landscape that can go to infinity.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing to think, when you talked about some of the numbers there, just there's like this entire world happening below our feet that we're kind of blind to. We may step right across it, and there could be 1 million dead ants under your feet, and you wouldn't even know it.
Yes, it's like a sci-fi story, right? Because we would be the giants and looking down on humanity with these warfares, and we would even miss them because we're so huge. And the ants as well, right there in Escondido, where these colonies come together, these are, upper middle class neighborhoods,
Yeah.
nice lawns and everything else, but there's a battlefield there that you don't see because ants fortunately don't scream as they're dying, or it would have been pretty awful to live in that part of the country.
So, question number 3. I've read about this idea of seasteading before, and it's basically like people wanting to get away from all sovereign powers. So they'll set up like an oil tanker or something out and floating in international water, and they'll want to create their own sort of societies. And a lot of times it's sort of in a libertarian mindset, but I think sometimes they think that they kind of just want to get rid of society completely. And is that something that's even possible with humans now? Can we get rid of society?
There's a lot of discussion about that. This is kind of the extreme version of cosmopolitanism, the idea that we can just get rid of societies or make some umbrella organization over all the societies, and that'll become more important to us. But the fact is that we don't want to give up these groups that we belong to. They give us meaning and validation, and they're part of timeless yearnings that are built into our brain. We can't drop them, and you can see that in a lot of aspects of psychology that just seem to be deeply rooted in us. So, for example, societies don't freely merge. That's what I saw looking across the animal kingdom and in human history. A healthy society stays separate. So just having societies come together, it's possible to have alliances, but they're not going to merge. The reliances on each other doesn't reduce the importance of differences. So you can go to the Iroquois Indians and see that they had this confederation, fought together, but their societies remained separate and strong and distinct for centuries. And we'll see that with the EU now, the European Union. I mean, the European Union, the member states have been in battle since the Middle Ages. They have different forms of economies, from communists to capitalists. And most importantly, from my point of view, they don't have vulnerable symbols that hold people together and make them want to be part of one unit. They don't have a unification story that's a grand story. So people are primarily devoted to their societies within that, and it's therefore expendable. So Britain and other countries might be able to come and go. And that's just one union. To put an umbrella over the whole world would be a very weak umbrella indeed at best. We want our societies. We want our differences. They cause us trouble sometimes, but we're proud of them. It gives us a sense of patriotism that's part of our inner core, should we say.
So that kind of raises an interesting question, and not to get too political, but, I think the U.S., maybe like especially like maybe 1970s or 80s. I'm not sure where to draw the line exactly, but the idea was that when people came to America, they tended more to integrate into kind of American culture. And it seems like maybe there's been a shift away from that, and more where people don't like keep all of your culture, come to America. And so there's like maybe more of a splintering. And does that mean then, would you say that kind of doesn't bode well for the U.S. as far as representing a strong society?
Well, it of course is tricky. Even Thomas Jefferson saw the fact that immigrants could be divisive in the society, all this diversity and so forth. But what he also recognized, and I think is important, is that a society does have to have some commonalities that bind people together. And the hope is that the civics test that immigrants pass provides those, because it tests them on their knowledge of identity, the symbols I'm talking about, and cultural standards and mores and so forth. The trick for societies is, though, that those kinds of things are important, but we come from a background as hunter-gatherers where societies were much more uniform. Mm-hmm. And so we tend to register each other in a much more restrictive way. We don't register symbolic meanings and stories and facts. Those are the things that immigrants are learning. We register all kinds of nuances like walking styles, speech patterns, all kinds of things that you see in the coffee shop. And so those nuances seem like trivial things, but they add up to a sense of foreignness sometimes. And then divisive periods, those can, tear people apart. And that's what we have more now. Now, the thing is with immigrants, many of them are trying really hard. They know much more about the symbols of our society than we do. We would famously not pass the civics test. Most citizens of the U.S., virtually all, would not be able to do what these poor people are doing coming in. But it takes civics tests cannot include things like speech patterns and walking style and things that we're registering on each other. So we still are dealing with this disjunct, and we always will be, even when people have been here for generations, like whatever, Italians, Irish, and so forth. They will retain some of those ancestral cues, and those are things that we know and recognize. But whether we reach a point where we're comfortable with people does sometimes take a long time.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So question number 4, I noticed you mentioned that one of the tribes, I believe it was in New Guinea, or maybe this was even broader than that, but that there was sort of a grass is greener effect to the territory, in that everyone thought where they were was kind of the chosen place and the best place, and everyone else's stuff was not as good. It got me wondering, is it possible that there's a psychology bias called the endowment effect, where we think that what we already own is more valuable than what other people own? And it kind of made me wonder if that was not an artifact of really are avoiding kind of violent territorial conflicts by thinking what we already have is better, and we don't go and try to take something that would be inferior. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it is a possible argument. Indeed, hunter-gatherers living in small bands didn't seem to have kind of the level of conflict we do now. And often you can see things like you say in the literature of, we got the best land anyway. Our rocks have these deep symbolic meanings to us. So we endow our landscapes with all these meanings as well. This is part of this identity that I'm talking about that allows us to bring in more and more people into our societies, or for our societies to grow. But of course, there's that jealousy effect. And as generations pass, even in the best situations, there's going to be conflicts over where resources are and who has access to them. But humans are able to get around those things in a way most animals can't. Species like ants have warfare. They don't have alliances like the Iroquois Indians did. They don't have alliances like the EU, and chimpanzees as well. But there are species like the bonobos and elephants and so forth that do have friends in different societies. They are not able to coordinate as well as human societies can to work together. But the general hope is that those coordinations between societies also get around jealousies, because you may love your coffee shop because it's yours, but if the other guy's coffee shop is bigger, there's still jealousies about it, and maybe you'll find something other than your coffee mug. Sorry, your coffee mug. Something other than your coffee mug to feel proud about, and that's what people do. They find things in their own culture to be proud about. The things that they own that they perceive as better than the next society, and that's a slew of things can vary from place to place and situation to situation. In short, the answer is long. But I suspect, at least our options are many. Most animals don't have these kinds of options.
They just go to battle if they want something, not to pretend that whatever it is, they change the goalposts on what makes something special to them.
Yes, most animals are highly competitive. A few are not, but even then, it depends on them not having a shortfall of resources. Once things get tight, including with human societies, that's when there's problems. And so some of the social stresses today are clearly about like not enough jobs and things like that. And so that's when situations between groups tend to escalate across species.
So question number 5, we always kind of like to have something a little fun for the 5th question. Maybe you could tell us a funny or surprising story or anecdote about E.O. Wilson, who you studied under.
E.O. Wilson, wow. Well, he's a Southern gentleman, but I learned something that was most fun about him when I first met him, because I was just an undergraduate from a small liberal arts college. And I was visiting, hoping to become his graduate student because I had one of his books for $1 from a science fiction book club. I had The Social Insects. It was an awesome book. So I knock on his door and he answers. And I don't know. I'm from a small liberal arts college. I don't know how to behave at Harvard, particularly with someone with who now has 2 Pulitzer Prizes and even back then was very decorated and so forth. But I just did as I did with my professors at home. I reached forward and grabbed his hand like this and said, "Great to meet you, Ed." And he invited me in. And later I would learn that, well, you're supposed to call him Ed after you get your PhD. But I had already started. So there, what am I going to do? But what was wonderful is it was like being with another kid, because he started showing me pictures of ants, and he had them spread out over his desk and eventually on the floor. And we were just talking like 2 kids about, the wonders of ant behavior. And I've gotten to realize in the people I meet, the scientists, that this is what is most dear to my heart, when they don't lose the inner kid. And he still has that.
That's amazing. Yeah, that sort of like beginner's mind and just a natural intrinsic curiosity for the subject.
Yeah, you need that just to go back to the basics, because a lot of the things you learn about the world are really basic things. You don't have to build this huge infrastructure of intellect to come up with ideas that are new. You have to have the child's perspective. So just don't lose it. That's not what I'm telling you, Jake.
I think that's good advice for all of us. So bonus question we always ask, and that is for a book recommendation. And what do you have for us today?
A favorite book of mine that's easy to give as a gift is Stuart Firestein's book, Ignorance. And Stuart's a professor at Columbia, and he teaches a course on ignorance. And it's a short book, but it's really important because ignorance is where science is at. The difference between science and religion and other things is that science allows for ignorance more than anything else. So what we don't know is really important. And this is something people sometimes don't realize, because science doesn't have all the answers. But we're proud not to have all the answers. We're proud to know what things we can answer, and therefore where we can look next. And that goal of looking next is where all young boys grow up and girls grow up to be scientists. They find those little corners that they want to know about next, filling in the ignorance that's all around us.
No, that's great. I love that. I mean, it sort of fits in a little bit with, one of my heroes, Warren Buffett, talks about circle of competence. And so if you stay within the things that you know as an investor and don't get outside into things that you're actually ignorant about, you might make bad investment decisions if you get outside of your circle of competence. A scientist is seeking, I guess, to explore those areas that are outside of their circle of competence. Kind of an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, and I'm sure he's interested in exploring those areas too, because if he finds a niche that he begins to understand before others do, that's an opportunity for his growth in more ways than one in that case. But yeah.
Expanding the circle of competence is kind of, I think, how they think about it.
Yeah, well, I have no competence in that area. I don't understand money. I leave that up to my wife. I just track down creatures in jungles. This is my circle of competence. It doesn't sound like much. My parents are impressed that I'm making a living on it. But on the other hand, I was doing it when I was, 2 years old. So I figure at least I'm, devoted to a cause.
Well, yeah, I think you never grew up, and that's a pretty enviable thing.
Well, thank you. I like that compliment, so I appreciate it.
Mark, thanks for coming on the show. It was a real pleasure, and everybody pick up Mark's book, The Human Swarm, and give it a read. Before you go, do me the huge honor of picking up your copy of The Rebel Allocator, available on Amazon in both print and digital formats. It's a business person's guide to effective capital allocation, told in a coming-of-age story of a college grad who crosses paths with a wealthy Midwesterner. It's fiction for the nonfiction reader. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you'd like to support this author and purchase their book, click here. If you'd like to become a subscriber to 5GQ, click here. And I included a couple other interviews that you might appreciate right here. Thanks. Happy reading.